I don't want a useless old woman here while I'm pregnant, Chelsea said, not even bothering to look up from her phone. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. My son Brian sat beside her, eyes fixed on the floor, his silence screaming louder than any words. Something inside me cracked, quietly, deeply, like glass under pressure finally giving way. You should find a new place to live, Mom, Brian added, his voice disturbingly casual, like he was commenting on the weather instead of throwing his 64-year-old mother out onto the street. It still feels surreal even now. 6 months earlier, I had sold my beautiful 3-bedroom home, where my late husband and I had raised Brian. I sold it to help him and Chelsea with their down payment. It's only temporary, Mom, Brian had assured me. Just until we get on our feet. Well, apparently, getting on their feet meant kicking me to the curb the moment I became inconvenient. I'd been living in their converted garage for half a year, paying them rent, cooking their meals, doing laundry, and helping out however I could. I even pitched in during the garage renovation, handling electrical and flooring myself. 30 years of DIY with my late husband had taught me more than Chelsea ever knew. Chelsea's pregnancy had been rough, and I was happy to help. I thought I was being useful. Turns out, I was just being used. I stood tall, refusing to let my voice shake. Where exactly am I supposed to go? Chelsea finally glanced up, her expression blank and unapologetic. That's not really our problem, Dorothy. We need the space for the baby's nursery. Brian nodded uncomfortably. There are nice senior communities, Mom. You'll meet people your own age. Apparently, 64 is now ancient. Time to be put out to pasture. This from the son I raised on my own. After his father walked out, I worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, went without so he could have more. And now? Now I was being discarded like an appliance that no longer worked. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life, you learn to keep your cards close. And believe me, I had cards they didn't know about. Fine, I said quietly. I'll be out by the weekend. Chelsea smirked, smugly triumphant. Brian looked relieved. Neither of them noticed the small private smile curling at the edge of my lips as I walked back to the garage. 3 days later, I signed a lease for a small but cozy apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Mine. As the movers arrived and I packed up my few belongings, I couldn't help but chuckle remembering their stunned faces. You found a place already? Brian asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Amazing what you can accomplish when you're motivated, I replied with a sugary smile. What they didn't know was that I'd been planning my exit the day Chelsea first referred to me as help. That apartment wasn't a reaction, it was a strategy. And the financial arrangements I'd been setting up quietly behind the scenes? Well, those were about to become their problem. Moving day arrived under perfect spring sunshine. I stood outside, supervising the movers as they carried boxes out of the garage. Chelsea watched from the kitchen window, her face tight with something that looked suspiciously like regret. Too little. Too late. Brian came outside as I climbed into my car. Mom, maybe we were hasty. If you want to stay. No thank you, dear, I interrupted sweetly. You made your position quite clear. I wouldn't want to be a burden. The guilt was written all over his face. Good. Let him sit with it. My new apartment was everything their garage wasn't, bright, peaceful and mine. No more walking on eggshells. No more overhearing Chelsea complain about me to her friends. No more pretending I couldn't hear the whispers or see the eye rolls. As I was unpacking my books that evening, my phone rang. Dorothy Mitchell, the voice asked. Yes. This is Sarah Chun from Hudson Properties. I just wanted to confirm your references checked out perfectly. Mr. Hudson is very pleased to have you as our new property manager. I smiled, sinking into my favorite chair. Wonderful. When does he want to begin inspections? Tomorrow, if you're available. He's particularly interested in one property, 1247 Maple Street. I nearly laughed. 1247 Maple Street. Brian and Chelsea's house. Oh, I'm very familiar with that property, I said, my voice calm and even. After the call, I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it toward the window. To new beginnings. What they didn't know was that I'd been in touch with Will Hudson for weeks. Will was a savvy developer looking to renovate and flip properties in neighborhoods like Brian's. When I mentioned my temporary living situation in a garage conversion, his interest in the address had spiked. "That's a prime location," he'd said. "Exactly what we're looking for." I was honest with him. Mostly. After I moved out, I called Hudson Properties about consulting opportunities. I may have emphasized how the garage conversion lacked proper permits, or how the homeowners seemed overwhelmed by the upkeep. Not lies, just facts, carefully selected. Will had offered me a role as a property inspector and acquisition consultant. Decent salary, flexible hours, and the delicious satisfaction of helping evaluate homes like 1247 Maple Street. The next morning, I met Will at a cafe 3 blocks from Brian's house. Tall, sharp suit, confident handshake, the kind of man who knew the value of every brick on the block. "Dorothy," he greeted me warmly, "your neighborhood knowledge is exactly what we need." For an hour, we discussed his development vision. He wasn't just buying homes, he was transforming entire blocks into upscale communities. Property values would skyrocket. Which was great, unless you couldn't afford the rising taxes or necessary upgrades. "I'd like to make an offer on 1247 Maple today," Will said, pulling out his tablet. I smiled behind my coffee cup. "They're first-time homeowners," I said thoughtfully. "Young, financially stretched. And I believe the garage conversion wasn't permitted." Will scribbled notes. "Perfect. Cash offer, quick close. Sometimes young families just need a little push to relocate." 2 hours later, clipboard in hand, I was walking up Brian and Chelsea's driveway beside Will Hudson. Through the window, I saw Chelsea freeze, phone in hand, eyes locked on me. Brian opened the door, rumpled and bleary-eyed. "Can I help you?" Will stepped forward, extending his card. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Will Hudson, Hudson Properties. This is Dorothy, my property consultant. We'd like to discuss a business opportunity." Brian blinked, his brain catching up to the scene. "Mom." I smiled, all professionalism. "Hello, Brian. Mr. Hudson has a very interesting proposal." Chelsea appeared behind him, hand on her swollen belly. "What is she doing here?" Will turned to me, then back to them. "You know each other?" "Dorothy is my mother-in-law," Chelsea said, her voice tight. I corrected gently. "I was asked to find my own place, remember? Mr. Hudson offered me a job. And I mentioned this property might be available." The silence that followed was thick with confusion, and the first twinge of panic. Brian's face turned pale. Chelsea gripped his arm, her knuckles white. "Perhaps we should come in and discuss the offer," Will said. We stepped into the same living room where just 4 days earlier, Chelsea had called me useless. Now, I was here to change everything. And this? This was just the beginning. I sat on their couch, the same couch I'd never been invited to sit on while I lived there. Across from me, Will Hudson laid out paperwork on their coffee table like he owned the room. Chelsea hovered behind Brian, one hand on her belly, the other clenched into a fist. Will cleared his throat. "I'll get straight to the point. I'm prepared to offer you $450,000 for this property. All cash. We'd close within 30 days. Chelsea gasped. "We paid $380,000 18 months ago." "With my help," I added quietly, though no one looked at me. Brian blinked rapidly. "That's generous. But we're not looking to sell." Will nodded, calm and professional. "Understood. However, you should know this entire block has been identified for redevelopment. The city approved infrastructure improvements, sewage, electrical, fiber optics. Construction will be extensive." The color drained from Chelsea's face. "And of course," Will continued, "that raises the issue of code compliance. Preliminary assessments suggest multiple properties have unpermitted modifications." Brian swallowed hard. "Garage conversions," Will added with precision. "If the city discovers any code violations during the permitting process, inspections will extend to neighboring homes." Chelsea's voice trembled. "How long do we have to decide?" "Construction starts in 6 weeks. The offer stands until Friday." 5 days. That was all they had to either sell, or spend thousands fixing the unpermitted garage, or risk being red-tagged. Will handed Brian his card. "Think it over. Dorothy can answer any questions about the timeline. As we stepped out onto their porch, I turned and smiled softly. Take care, you two. I hope everything works out for the best. My phone rang before I even reached my car. Brian. I let it go to voicemail. Chelsea called next. Then Brian again. The third time, I was back in my apartment with a cup of tea. I picked up. Mom, what the hell is going on? Brian's voice was high-pitched, shaky with panic. Language, I said mildly. And I thought I made it clear, I'm no longer your concern. This isn't a joke. That man wants to tear up our whole neighborhood. Mr. Hudson is improving it, I corrected. Property values will increase significantly. That's good for homeowners who want to sell. We don't want to sell. We just bought the house. With my money, I reminded him gently. $40,000 of my retirement savings. Money I'll never see again. The line went quiet. Mom, I know we hurt you. I laughed, and it wasn't a kind sound. Hurt me? Brian, you chose to throw me out the moment I became inconvenient. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. Chelsea was emotional. It's the pregnancy hormones. Don't blame this on pregnancy hormones, I snapped. She showed me exactly who she is. And you supported her. So this is revenge? I let out a long sigh. Brian, the city had already approved development. Will Hudson was already scouting the area. All I did was point out your house met his criteria. You could have warned us. Like you warned me when you decided I was useless and needed to be replaced by a crib? Silence. Then, what do you want from us? I don't want anything from you anymore, I said softly, and realized I truly meant it. I wanted respect. I wanted to be treated like family. But it's too late for that. Please. Chelsea's pregnant. We need stability. Then maybe she should have thought about that before biting the hand that fed her. I hung up. An hour later, someone pounded on my door. Through the peephole I saw Chelsea, mascara streaks down her cheeks, hair pulled back in a loose bun, face puffy from crying. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Please, she said, choking back sobs. I was wrong. I was stressed about the baby. I took it out on you. But this is insane. You're going to destroy our lives because I said something mean. I crossed my arms, leaning against the frame. Something mean. I echoed. I admit it, she said. But we're family. I shook my head slowly. No. Family doesn't throw each other away. You made sure I knew I wasn't family when you kicked me out. We'll pay you back. With what money? You're drowning financially, about to have a baby, and living paycheck to paycheck. Even if you wanted to pay me back, you couldn't. Her face crumpled. Then what do you want? How do we fix this? Finally. The question I'd been waiting for. You want to know how to fix this? I asked, arms still folded. She nodded, tears still falling. It can't be fixed, I said. You can't unring a bell. Her expression shifted, shock, desperation, then anger. So that's it? You'll ruin us over hurt feelings. I stepped forward, eyes level with hers. You called me useless. Convinced my son to throw me out of the house I helped you buy. And now when you need something, suddenly I'm family again. I said I was sorry. No, I said calmly. You said sorry because you need something from me. That's not the same. She was quiet. I continued. Will Hudson's offer is more than fair. Take the money. Buy a home you can actually afford. Start over. We don't want another neighborhood. We want our house. Then you should have thought about that before alienating the one person protecting you from all this. Chelsea's face twisted. What do you mean protecting us? I smiled, and it wasn't entirely kind. Do you think it's a coincidence that Hudson Properties showed up exactly 1 week after I moved out? She stared at me, horror creeping in. Will and I have been talking for weeks. He's a lovely man. Very interested in development. I've been helpful. You planned this, she whispered. I planned to protect my family. Until my family made it clear they didn't want my protection. Her phone buzzed. She looked down and went pale. Brian's coming over. Good, I said. It's time we had an honest conversation. 10 minutes later, Brian burst in like the building was on fire. Mom, Chelsea said you admitted to setting this whole thing up. I admitted no such thing, I replied calmly. I explained I'm consulting for Mr. Hudson. Your property happened to meet his criteria. That's the same thing. No, Brian. It's not. Creating a problem is one thing. Stopping myself from solving it for you is another. He stared at me, bewildered. I walked to my kitchen drawer and pulled out a manila folder. I hoped I wouldn't need this, I said, handing it over. Inside were the city notices, documents about the infrastructure evaluation, and the requirement to bring homes into code compliance. This was sent out to all homeowners on Maple Street. But because I was listed on your mortgage as the down payment contributor, the agent forwarded your notice to me. Chelsea snatched the paper from Brian. You've had this for months? I've been handling it for 6 weeks, I said. Remember when I asked about the permits back in February? When I offered to help sort it out? Brian's mouth fell open. You said it was just maintenance stuff. I didn't want you to worry. I had a contractor lined up. It would have cost $8,000 and taken 2 weeks. Chelsea's voice was barely above a whisper. But, you never did the work. That was going to be my moving out gift, I said softly. A fully permitted, compliant property. All ready for city inspection. I had it scheduled for next week. Brian collapsed onto the couch, his face ashen. But then you kicked me out. And I stopped solving your problems. They sat there stunned. Silent. Finally, Chelsea whispered, Can you still fix it? I looked at them, 2 adults who had thrown me away like a used tissue, and felt something in my chest crack one final time. No, I said gently. It's too late for that now. The next morning brought a string of missed calls from Brian and a single text from Chelsea that simply said, Please. I deleted it and poured myself a cup of coffee. My apartment was calm. The windows opened to a breeze. My phone buzzed again. By noon, Will Hudson called. Dorothy, quick update, he said. The Mitchells are asking about payment plans for the permit work. I stirred honey into my tea and smiled at the timing. Payment plans. I asked innocently. They say they can't afford the $8,000 in upfront costs. They want to know if we'd accept partial payments over time. And your response? I told them our construction schedule doesn't allow for staggered compliance, he said. City regulations require everything verified within 2 weeks. No exceptions. Perfect, I said. There was a pause. Then Will added carefully, the young man got emotional. Talked about family obligations. About how family should help each other in crisis. I let out a dry laugh. Family does help family, Mr. Hudson, when the relationship is mutual. These particular family members made it very clear that ours was not. I see. Well, they've asked for the weekend to make a decision. After we hung up, I stood by the window and looked out over the neighborhood I'd lived in for 40 years. The city was bright with spring. And I felt, for the first time in months, completely at peace. By late afternoon, another message came in. Brian, Mom, we need to talk face to face. Please. I stared at the text for a while before replying. You had 6 months to talk face to face. You chose not to. The response came within seconds. I'm coming over. Me, I won't be home. That was a lie. I just wasn't interested in pretending we had anything left to say. 20 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. I ignored it. Then came pounding. Mom. I know you're in there, your car's in the lot. I turned up the volume on my audiobook and continued reading. The pounding stopped. Through the peephole, I saw Brian slump to the floor, back against the wall outside my door. He stayed there. 4 hours. When he finally left, he slid a piece of paper under the door. I waited 10 minutes before picking it up. Mom, I know I can't undo what we did. I know sorry isn't enough. But Chelsea's scared. We don't have anyone else to turn to. You've always been the strongest person I know. You always fix things. Please fix this. Brian. The strongest person he knew. Funny how strength only mattered to him when it served his needs. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with everything else I decided to keep, but never look at again. Friday arrived with a cold, steady rain. The kind that soaks everything with a quiet heaviness. I was reorganizing my bookshelf when the phone rang. Dorothy Mitchell speaking. Hi, this is Patricia Hayes, Brian Mitchell's mortgage officer at First National. He listed you as an emergency contact and, we have a situation. I sat down slowly. What kind of situation? Mr. Mitchell applied for a home equity line to cover unexpected costs, but the property assessment flagged some structural concerns. The converted garage was not permitted. We can't approve the line until the property is brought into full code compliance. I nearly smiled. So the bank had discovered the issue independently. Perfect timing. I see. And why are you calling me? Your son said you might be able to assist with the compliance costs. He mentioned your experience with renovations. My eyebrows lifted. What exactly did he tell you? He said you were in construction management and had offered to oversee the permit work. Construction management? I'd been a secretary at an insurance agency for 30 years. Apparently, Brian had no problem inventing credentials when it suited him. Ms. Hayes, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not in a position to assist with this project. There was a pause on her end. Mr. Mitchell was quite insistent that you'd already committed. Mr. Mitchell was mistaken. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time. Brian had told the bank I would fix things, without even asking. He'd told them I was already on board. Even now. Even after everything. He still thought I existed to solve his problems. My phone rang again. Brian. Mom, Patricia Hayes, said you refused to help with the permits. I didn't refuse, I said calmly. I corrected her misunderstanding about my involvement. You told me you had it all arranged. The $8,000. The contractor. Everything. I had it arranged when I lived in your house. When I believed I was still part of your family. That arrangement died the day you kicked me out. This is insane. You're destroying us over hurt feelings. And there it was. The final snap. Hurt feelings. I repeated slowly. Brian, do you even understand what you've put me through? I took a breath and let it all pour out. I sold my home, to help you buy yours. I moved into a garage. I paid you rent. I cooked your meals. I cleaned your house. I tiptoed around your wife while she treated me like a piece of old furniture she was too polite to throw out. Mom. I'm not finished. Silence. When I needed comfort, you chose her convenience over my dignity. When I asked for respect, you gave me distance. And now when you need something, suddenly I'm family again. The line was so quiet I thought he'd hung up. Then finally, his voice, soft and broken. What do you want from us? I want you to solve your own problems. Just once. Like an adult. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. Through the peephole, I saw Frank and Linda Morrison, Chelsea's parents. I hadn't seen them since the wedding. Curious, I opened the door. Frank. Linda. What brings you by? Frank nodded grimly. Linda looked anxious. Dorothy, she began, we need to talk about the situation with Brian and Chelsea. I stepped aside. Come in. I just made coffee. We sat, and they explained that Chelsea had called them in tears, begging for money to fix the code violations. She's 8 months pregnant, Linda said. The stress isn't good for her or the baby. Frank leaned forward. We know there's been a falling out. But surely we can work something out. We're all adults here. What exactly did Chelsea tell you? I asked. They exchanged a glance. She said you moved out after a disagreement. That you were upset about not being included in the baby planning. She said you didn't want to give up the garage for the nursery, Linda added. So now I was just an overly sensitive old woman who couldn't handle being sidelined. I stood, walked to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the manila folder. Let me show you what really happened. I laid out the timeline, the code violations, the notices, the $8,000 plan I had in place, and the exact words Chelsea used when she told me to leave. Linda went pale. Frank's jaw locked tight. She called you useless? Linda whispered. Among other things. Frank stood abruptly. That girl, we raised her better than that. I'm sure you did, I said. But people change when it becomes easy to take advantage of kindness. Linda looked at me earnestly. Dorothy, what would it take to fix this? Not just the house, all of it. The family. It was a fair question. A hard one. Some things can't be fixed, I said. Chelsea showed me who she was when she thought I couldn't fight back. And Brian? He made his choice when he stood beside her and not me. Frank nodded slowly. So what happens now? Now? I stood. They deal with the consequences. Like everyone else does. And the baby? The baby will be fine. They'll sell the house. Make a profit. Move somewhere they can actually afford. Chelsea will learn that actions have consequences. And Brian? He'll learn that his mother is no longer his safety net. As they stood to leave, Frank looked me in the eye. For what it's worth, Dorothy, you're handling this exactly right. We'll be having a serious talk with our daughter. I nodded. Good. As the door closed behind them, I realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a feeling in my gut that something was coming. And I was right. Will Hudson called just after 9 a.m. Dorothy, he said, voice unusually serious. We've got a problem. I set my crossword puzzle aside. What kind of problem? I just got off the phone with the city planning department. Someone filed a formal complaint against our development project. They're accusing Hudson Properties of using intimidation tactics to force residents to sell. My blood turned cold. Who filed it? Frank Morrison, Will said flatly. Chelsea's father. Of course. I should have seen this coming. Will, I can explain. You might need to. The city's launching an investigation. They want to interview everyone involved in the project. That includes you. I closed my eyes, my heart beginning to pound. What are they investigating, exactly? They're looking into whether we used unethical pressure to push homeowners out. If they find anything questionable, the entire project could be shut down. And your involvement will be reviewed in detail. He didn't need to spell it out. I'd gone from being the solution to becoming a liability. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Sarah Chun with the City Planning Compliance Office. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding your consulting work with Hudson Properties. Of course, I said, keeping my voice steady. When would be convenient? Today, if possible. This is time sensitive. By 2:30 p.m., I was seated in a sterile conference room at City Hall, the kind that smelled like old paper and recycled air. Detective Chun was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe. Sharp eyes, no smile. The kind of person who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. Mrs. Mitchell, she began, can you describe your relationship with Hudson Properties? I kept my tone calm and measured. I'm a consultant. I live in the area. I help identify properties that may be suitable for development or renovation. And your relationship to the owners of 1247 Maple Street? Brian is my son. Chelsea is my daughter-in-law. Her pen stopped moving. You recommended your son's house for acquisition? I identified it as a property that met development criteria, specifically due to unpermitted modifications and signs of financial strain. After being removed from that same property by the owners? So they knew. Of course they did. I straightened in my seat. Detective, are you familiar with the code violations at 1247 Maple Street? She flipped through a folder. Garage conversion, no permits filed. I spent 6 weeks trying to help them fix it. I arranged for contractors. I was going to cover the costs myself. This was before I began working with Mr. Hudson. But you didn't complete the work. I was asked to leave the property before I could. And then you contacted Hudson Properties. No, I said firmly. Hudson Properties contacted me. They were already scouting the neighborhood. I simply provided accurate information. Detective Chen leaned back, studying me. Mrs. Mitchell, some might see your actions as retaliatory. I met her eyes, voice level. Detective, some might see what my son did to me as elder financial abuse. She blinked. I continued. I provided factual, city-documented information about a property that violated code. Mr. Hudson made his decisions based on that. The interview went on for nearly 2 hours. When it ended, she stood and escorted me to the door. Off the record? She asked. I nodded. These kinds of family disputes, they rarely end well. Off the record? I replied. Sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences, even when they're family. 3 days later, Will Hudson called again. Dorothy, he said. The city closed the investigation. I clutched the phone tighter. No findings. None. They reviewed our paperwork, our emails, your notes. Everything was clean. No fraud. No coercion. Your consulting work was deemed appropriate and professional. Relief washed over me like a tide. And the complaint? Withdrawn. Frank Morrison called City Hall this morning. Apologized for wasting their time. Apparently, he had some illuminating conversations with his daughter. I couldn't help but smile. That afternoon, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw them, Brian and Chelsea. Both looked like they'd aged a decade in a week. Brian's eyes were sunken. Chelsea's face blotchy from crying. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. Mom, Brian said softly. We owe you an apology. Several, Chelsea added, her voice barely above a whisper. I said nothing. Just waited. My parents told us everything, Chelsea said. How you were trying to protect us. How you had a plan to fix the permits. And how we destroyed that. Her voice cracked. We threw it all away, Brian whispered. We threw you away. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised alone. The boy who had now caused me more pain than anyone else ever had. Yes, I said simply. You did. Can you forgive us? Chelsea asked, eyes wet with tears. It was the question I had been both dreading and expecting. I looked at them for a long moment before I answered. I can forgive you, I said at last. But I can't forget what you showed me, who you really are when you think no one's watching. We want to make it right, Brian said quickly. We'll do anything. How? I asked. They looked at each other, clearly having no answer. We don't know, Chelsea admitted. We don't know how to fix what we broke. You can't, I said gently. But you can learn from it. Brian nodded. Does that mean there's a chance we could be a family again? I took a breath. Maybe, I said. But it would be a different kind of family. One based on respect, not obligation. One where I'm not treated as disposable the moment I'm no longer useful. Hope flickered in his eyes. We can do that. Can you? I asked. Because Chelsea, next time you're overwhelmed, will you take it out on me again? And Brian, next time your wife makes a demand that costs me my dignity, who will you side with? They both opened their mouths to respond, and then stopped. The questions weren't rhetorical. Think about it, I said. And when you have honest answers, call me. 2 weeks later, they sold the house to Will Hudson for $450,000. After paying off their mortgage and fees, they walked away with $60,000 in profit. They bought a smaller home in a less expensive neighborhood. One they could actually afford, on their own. Linda looked at me a month later. Chelsea gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Dorothy. It took 6 months before we had dinner together again. Not because I was punishing them, but because it genuinely took that long for all three of us to figure out how to be a family, without power games, without guilt, without someone being used or discarded. The night they invited me over, Brian texted. No expectations. Just dinner. You, us, and Dorothy. When I arrived, Chelsea opened the door herself. She looked different. Tired, yes, but softer somehow. Humbled. Brian took my coat, awkwardly but respectfully. The baby was asleep in a bassinet by the window. Her first word was gamma, Chelsea said shyly. We didn't teach her that. She just said it one day while reaching for your picture. I turned to the baby. That tiny hand. That peaceful face. And I cried. Not out of sadness. Not because of what I'd lost. But because for the first time, I truly felt seen. Our relationship is smaller now. Boundaried. But stronger. Chelsea treats me with respect. Not because I demanded it, but because she learned what happens when she doesn't. Brian has changed too. He makes his own decisions now, without leaning on me like a crutch. He learned that his mother won't always be there to clean up his messes. And me? I finally understood that love, real love, isn't about enduring everything. It's about knowing when to say enough. It's about refusing to be anyone's doormat, even if they share your blood. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is let people fall, so they learn how to stand. I'm 65 now. Living in my own apartment. Working a job I actually enjoy. Paying my own bills. Reading in peace. Drinking tea on my balcony without being rushed, judged, or ignored. And I've never felt more free. That little girl, my namesake, is growing up in a home her parents worked for, not one built on guilt and borrowed sacrifice. One day, I hope she hears this story. Not as a tale of bitterness, but as proof that no matter how late it feels, you always have the right to stand up and say, I am not disposable. You don't have to yell. You don't need revenge that explodes. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is calm, quiet, permanent. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, share yours in the comments. Your voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from.